Grace and peace. I'm Brian Musser, the Baptist Campus Minister at Drexel University, and this is Peace and Power Christian Fellowship, the peace of Jesus Christ to change your life, the power of the Holy Spirit to change the world. And we are continuing our series on obedience in the presence of God, a study in the Old Testament law. We're looking at Leviticus 19 in this lesson. This is the fourth lesson. This is the second video of the fourth lesson, looking at living in the land, and going to concentrate on the parts of Leviticus 19 that stresses what we should do to love our neighbors. In the last video, we looked at the overall structure and some of the things about specifically worshiping God. And the idea behind Leviticus 19 is be holy as God is holy. That is the initial idea coming in verse 2. And then the subsequent verses are laws or commands about what it looks like to be holy as God is holy. The ones we looked at last video are a lot about worship, a lot about your relationship with God, some of them connected to Old Testament laws. This one and the next video are going to be about not just your relationship with God, but your relationship with others. First, we're going to talk about your neighbor, and then in the next video, we're going to talk about others. But Leviticus 19 has a lot of to do with how we relate to others. First of all, each of you must respect your mother and father. That's coming from the Ten Commandments, Commandment number 5. And then, do not steal, do not lie, do not deceive one another, do not swear falsely by my name and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Do not defraud your neighbor. So we're looking at commandment number 5, honor your father and mother, and then we're like, do not steal, which is one of the 10 commandments. Do not lie, do not deceive one another, do not defraud or rob your neighbor. That's the stealing, that's the bearing false witness. Do not swear falsely by my name and so profane the name of the Lord your God. That could be both false testimony and using the Lord's name in vain. I want to highlight that a little bit. This seems to be indicating in this idea of using the Lord's name in a way that manipulates other people. You know, when you know you're lying, saying, I swear to God, even when you know you're lying. Or, you know, I think it could even be included in something like, the Lord has told me to tell you, and not have the Lord tell you anything whatsoever, or not anything like that. But it's when we use God's name, and when we attach God's name to our ideas in a way that tries to manipulate our neighbors, so to either for our benefit or for their harm. That's kind of the bearing false witness, is when we're in a situation where telling the truth can either benefit us or harm somebody else. That's what's going on here. So basically, love your neighbors by honoring your parents, those who came before you, by not taking what God has given them, not stealing, by not lying, by telling the truth, by being honest, whether or not it benefits or harms you, by actually being honest and not using God's name in a way that will, in a way that abuses somebody. Don't defraud or rob your neighbor. It's interesting that fraud and robbing are here. So taking something strictly from them or tricking them in such a way that you get something instead of just flat out taking what's theirs. Then also, do not hate your fellow Israelite in your heart. Rebuke your neighbor frankly so that you will not share in their guilt. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Stand up in the presence of the aged, show respect for the elderly, and revere your God. I am the Lord. Do not use dishonest standards when measuring length, weight, or quantity. Use honest scales and honest weights, an honest ephah and an honest hin. Units of measurement in ancient Israel. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. So again, more about how we relate to our neighbors. Don't hate them. One of the few things in this this practical idea of holiness that isn't an action, but something going on in our own hearts. There's a little bit there, but not necessarily everything there. Rebuke your neighbor frankly so that you will not share their guilt. Don't seek revenge. Don't bear a grudge. Love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. So, think about this. Leviticus is in the exact middle of the Old Testament, Torah, in the first 5 books. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. It's in the middle. 36 chapters. The divide between 18 and 19 is kind of the middle. We can see with 18 being about sexual laws, 20 being about sexual laws, it seems the bookend setting up chapter 19 being the middle chapter. 37 verses. The middle verses in the middle chapter of the middle of the Torah, someplace around the very middle of the Torah, is love your neighbor as yourself. If we were just to kind of do what's in the center of the Torah, we could very easily see this one verse, this one idea, love your neighbor as yourself, being the center of all this. How you are holy like God is holy does have some ritual and ceremonial and worship content to it, does have some Old Testament laws about stealing and the 10 Commandments about stealing and things like that. But at the heart of it is love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus points this out when asked what is the greatest commandment. He's love your God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And as Christians, we focus on that Jesus said that, but that wasn't a unique idea with Jesus. Most Jews in his day would have agreed with him that that is actually a good summary of the central parts of the Old Testament. Love God, love neighbor. Now, as we see this, there's some interesting things here. Take care of folks, the aged and the elderly. Don't cheat folks with your units of measure, and don't get revenge. But it all wraps around this love your neighbor. So, looking at some of these things, how does this list exemplifies Israelites' idea of what it means to love someone? A lot of it is very tangible. Very little of it is about how you feel about them. Most of it's about how you act toward them. Throughout this, we see the I am the Lord your God, and this idea of who brought you out of Egypt. How is that attempting to motivate the Israelites? What is that doing? The repetition of the I am the Lord, or the motivation who brought you out of Egypt. What's being communicated there? And these commands are specifically directed at one's fellow Israelite and or neighbor. Should we assume that we only need to act this way to those who are part of the group? So the fact that it talks about your fellow Israelite and your neighbor, is that intended to be limiting, that we only need to love our neighbor, or it's okay, don't steal from your neighbor, your fellow Israelite, the person who is like you, but stealing from other people is okay. Is that what this is getting at? Would love to hear comments about that. Drop down in the comments section if you have any thoughts or ideas. Would love to engage you there. As always, there are 3 ways to join: in person Sunday nights at 5 p.m. in the JEMIC, live via Zoom Monday nights at 7 p.m. These weekly wrap-ups on YouTube and or WordPress. I'm all over the social media: Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, WordPress, YouTube. Like, subscribe, follow as necessary. Enjoyed having this conversation with you. Hopefully it continues real soon.